Hello and welcome to The Long View, a podcast that takes a closer look at the games people play. The Long View is a proud member of the Dice Tower Network. Go to dicetower.com for a host of great podcasts, news, reviews, and commentary from Tom Vassell, Eric Summerer, and all of the other contributors to the Dice Tower Network. There's truly something for everyone at the Dice Tower. The Long View is also generously sponsored by GameSurplus.com. GameSurplus.com is your best choice on the net to buy games online. Thor's prices can't be beat, and their customer service is second to none. So the next time you're thinking about buying a game online, consider GameSurplus.com, and be sure to tell them The Long View sent you. My name is Jeff Gamble. I'm the host of The Long View, and tonight I am very happy to be joined once again by Justin Nordstrom, who is my guest tonight as we get ready to tackle the Uwe Rosenberg masterpiece of Agricola. So, Justin, welcome, and thank you for coming back on the show this evening.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Well, it's always great to have you. You're one of my returning guests, and one of these days, I don't know, I'm going to have to give you a T-shirt or something. I don't know.
That's right.
For being on the show so many times. You and Joel Eddy seem to be in a death cage match there, trying to figure out who's going to be the one on the most. And I got to tell you, despite your best efforts, I think he's still ahead of you. So you're going to have to pick up the pace there, Justin, is what I'm saying.
Wow, he's a pretty prolific guy then, because I've been on 8 million times?
8 million, yes. That's it, and that's really not an exaggeration, I'm sure. So, but anyway, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I'm very grateful, in all seriousness, to have some great friends that are always willing to come on and share their thoughts about games that they love. So, Justin, as I said, we're going to be talking about Agricola tonight, and I was very happy when you suggested that we talk about that game because I've done an episode on Le Havre, and I just actually recorded an episode with Joel where I talked about a Uwe Rosenberg card game called Mamma Mia. But most people, I think, would point to Agricola as, kind of the masterpiece of Uwe's designs. Now, I would argue personally it's Le Havre, but I think, the people have spoken. I think Agricola is rated number 3, I think, at this point on BGG's rankings, and has been a sort of a fixture for a long time. So I'm glad we're going to finally have a chance to delve into it. What I'd like to do, though, beforehand is, as usual, we're going to take a look back in time at another year in gaming. And the year that we have selected for tonight, we are now actually all the way back to 1996. So we're going to take a look at some of the games from 1996. I got to be honest, there's not a ton that I've played, but I know there's a few, and I know there's at least a couple that you have as well. So if you don't mind, we're going to start off our look back at 1996 with Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage. This is a game I think that you have some considerable experience with, yes?
Minimal experience. I've played it maybe twice.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, well, I guess that's not considerable.
But I know the system that the game is based on, and I have some experience with that. It's interesting because Hannibal was re-released more recently, so it has a kind of second life more recent times, and it's kind of uses that card-driven engine, but like the earliest of those, it relied on 2 different types of decks. So it has this, it's almost like a game within a game. Every time, the premise of Hannibal is that you're fighting the Punic Wars, and there's Rome, and the Carthaginians are coming across the Alps and so forth. Think elephants and so forth. And the premise, of course, is that this is a traditional war game, a point-to-point war game, but every time enemy units would, be in the same spot, every time you'd fight a battle, you'd set the game aside, and you'd pull out a separate deck of cards, and you'd play this kind of mini game. And wargamers are kind of divided amongst those that think this system is really good, and those like myself that think that a more straightforward combat results table where you just roll some dice and get your results right away is not only more not only does it speed up the game, but it actually contributes to the strategy behind the game. So the game itself drew some I guess, mixed reviews because of that. That's kind of its most distinctive feature. But again, because it was reissued by Valley Games, there's still people playing it. It's still, I'd say it's a much more widely played game than some of the other war games from the 90s.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this system that is used in Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, I remember, I think, playing the game once at a con. I only got through about 3/4 of the game because I had to go to another gaming commitment. But it sort of struck me, I was curious if you found the same sort of parallel between that sort of mini game you're talking about. Reminded me very much of the mini game that's played in the game 1989. Have you ever played that game?
Yes. Yeah, you and I played it together.
Did we play that one together?
We did.
Oh, that was it. Was that at WBC?
No, that was at my house.
See now. That was at your house. Okay, so
I see it was very memorable. I think I won. I probably won. Let's
did.
Just say I won.
All right, let's just say I'm getting old. All right, we'll just leave it at that. So I knew I had played it. I just didn't know that I had played that with you. I remember being shown 1989 by a gentleman at the WBC, and I didn't think that was you. He kind of taught me the game, so I guess you and I must have played it at a later date at your house.
Right. Clearly it made a good impression.
Well, every game that I lose tends to fade in my memory. Right. It's kind of a self-protective mechanism. But anyway, so but you would say yes, that it's kind of the same kind of a feel, yes?
Yeah, that analogy is a good one. I mean, except... Well, and like that, like 1989, there is sort of I feel like all right, set aside the game you've been playing and play this other little game. I just find it to be a distraction, and it means that even the most minimal battle feels like it takes a lot of time. I don't mind, that kind of game within a game for the truly epic, okay, let's see if, Hannibal and his elephants can, take Rome. That could make it feel kind of exciting, but when it's just this little skirmisher party on the outskirts of this one random province, it feels kind of onerous to have to do that. And I did have that same sense with 1989. Now, again, maybe some people think that it contributes to the strategy of the game, and that's fine, but I'm just saying that what I think is interesting about card-driven war games, and Hannibal is one of them, is that since Hannibal, most of the more recent ones have all relied on a CRT. In fact, Mark Herman's remake, Washington's War, did away with the battle deck, the deck of battle cards, and just relied on a more straightforward CRT. You roll 2 dice, and in a second, you know the result of the battle. And I just feel that it makes the game move so much more quickly, and that's my criticism of Hannibal. It's a beautiful game. The board itself is really, really nice. One of those ones that you could see someone putting in a frame and hanging on the wall of a gaming room or something. I mean, it's that nice. So it's a great game in several ways, and I'm not familiar with another game that does as elegantly a job of looking at this conflict, but I don't think I would play it for that reason.
Okay. Well, the other thing that I kind of wanted to sort of touch on, and I'm relying on your sort of wargaming experience to tell me whether or not I'm off base on this, but Hannibal, I kind of traced a line from, Washington's War, Wilderness War, Hannibal, all of these sort of card-driven war games, and I think that Hannibal also... It was one of the first war games that I had looked at and played that I really found the movement was very, very simplified. It was a kind of point-to-point movement.
That's right.
And I wasn't constantly having to consult tables and charts as far as what the effect on movement would be. And it sort of seemed to streamline the experience for me a little bit. And I kind of enjoyed that. Now, I know there's probably people who wouldn't, people who would prefer that more realistic, nitty-gritty kind of feel. But, these games are sort of at that grand operational kind of level anyway. And I liked the fact that it didn't bog down with that kind of movement. Was Hannibal one of those kind of progenitors of that style, of that simple point-to-point movement, or had that been around before then?
Yeah, there were earlier point-to-point games, and some of the ones that you mentioned, like Wilderness War, for instance, terrain is a bigger factor in that game. It affects movement, it affects combat, but in general, one of the reasons that some wargamers like point-to-point is that rather than, say, a hex-based map, Point to point, it kind of incorporates the terrain into the movement allowance. So, for instance, it might be only a short distance between points A and B, but you might have to stop more frequently along the way, and that reflects the terrain you're going through, as opposed to needing to remember, okay, well, mountains count as this many points and forests count as this many. So yeah, it does streamline it in a way, and different, but that doesn't mean that those games all have the same level of complexity. So some might include terrain and combat and so forth. But yeah, I would say it's fairly straightforward. It's not a difficult game to teach or to play. And if one of your listeners is interested in classical Rome, maybe it's a game they want to try out. I don't mean to disparage it. It's just if the battle deck is something that you like, you'll love the game. If battle cards are something that you like, it'll be the perfect game for you. GMT released Sword of Rome, which is it's different, but it has it covers some similar ground, and that would be another one to check out if that's of interest.
Well, fantastic. Thanks for that recommendation. I'm sure some people will definitely enjoy taking a peek at that. And I think that is currently on GMT's either release or it's scheduled to be released or something. I received their newsletter, and I remember seeing Sword of Rome. Might have been a deluxe map
as a reprint.
As a reprint. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's definitely a good tip because it's something that'll be available. So fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts about that one.
Sure.
I'd like to move on to the next entry, which is I kind of have a soft spot for it. It's the Catan card game. This is probably one of the first Euro games that I ever played. I think it actually might have been the first. I think I started with this one and then went to Carcassonne. And I absolutely remember being just completely enraptured by the Catan card game because I had never seen anything like it before. The whole notion of your town, your village growing, actually putting up roads, expanding, turning your towns into cities, adding buildings. And I remember being completely sort of just geeked out by the rotating cards to show your resource fields. It's like, oh, well, I have 3 wheat. And if I want to spend wheat, I just rotate the card. Now I have 2. Now I have 1. And I remember thinking to myself that was just so clever. I had never seen anything like that before. The art was absolutely beautiful. Loved it. My wife really enjoyed the game. She likes any game where you're kind of building things. We really spent hours and hours and had a lot of great fun playing the Catan card game. I do also recall it being tense at times. There were some cards that we almost house ruled out of there. The Arsonist was one of them. There was nothing quite so terrible as spending tons of turns trying to gather the resources that you needed to build your huge aqueduct or something, and then the very next turn have your opponent burn it to the ground with the Arsonist, and How
do you burn an aqueduct?
I don't know.
Wouldn't the water put out the fire?
You would think maybe they weakened with fire. The pilings, the supports underneath, which caused the whole thing to crack. I don't know. I'm not a Roman engineer, but anyway, I just really remember enjoying that game quite a bit. There were a couple of flaws that we kind of found as time went by, some things that we weren't too enraptured with. And I'm very curious. I've been very close to picking up Rivals for Catan a couple of times, which is the re-implementation of it. Apparently, Klaus Teuber decided that he was going to take another run at it. I do remember when we played quite a bit that the windmill token was extremely important. If you could get a hold of this little wooden windmill token, then basically what that meant is that when the resource dice were rolled, if a windmill came up, you could steal resources from your opponent. And so it became this sort of rich get richer kind of thing where, if I could get quickly build up a superiority in these windmill icons, which is what got you the token, I could just, keep my opponent from really being able to gather very many resources at all. And so we kind of found that kind of bogged the game. The other one, of course, was the knight token, but that never seemed to be as valuable in game terms as the windmill token did. And so we found that kind of unbalanced the game a little bit. And so after a while and playing a lot of, obviously other games, we left that one behind. But I have a lot of fond memories of it. And I'm curious if, number one, you've played it, and number two, what your impressions were of it, and whether, it's something that you would ever revisit again, I guess would be the third question.
Well, yeah, I would play it again. I don't think I had, as I think you came to this game, when at a point in your gaming that this was relatively new. Euro games themselves were pretty new, and you introduced it to me at a later point in my kind of development as a gamer. And so I think my reaction would have been the same as if someone brought out Catan itself. I would have thought, this is a good game. It's a really sound game, pretty well balanced. But I don't think it was one that I would, have really gravitated towards. Now, if you had showed it to me, the day you first learned it, I would have been all over it. I would have been like, this is fantastic. I think my thoughts, actually, over Thanksgiving, one of my relatives had bought her husband a Star Trek version of Settlers of Catan, because he's a real Trekkie, I guess. Right. And they were playing Catan. I think they might have played it once or twice before, but they were playing Catan at a point when it was still fairly new to them. And it was interesting to see them, really, really loving this board game experience. And so I was really happy for them. For me personally, there's games I like more than Settlers, and so there's card games that I like more than the Catan card game. But I definitely think it's a sound, solid game. And if someone were to bring it out, I would definitely play it. It's probably one that, just like you were saying, in time, I think I kind of, went in a different direction in terms of games that I, have pursued or wanted to play. But I remember when you showed it to me that I was like, this is a cool game. It's also a really, it's much more portable than Catan itself. It's a 2-player, so you could, play it with, you got one person, you're on a plane flight or something. Right. You could play it, and then for all those reasons, I think it's a solid game. That was kind of the way I remember thinking about it.
Yeah, you brought up some good points. The first of which is that it's 2-player, which is really important because you cannot play Catan 2-player. It's just terrible. You really have to have, in my opinion, at least 4 players to make Catan an interesting game. But this Catan card game, being designed for 2 was really just a great experience as a 2-player game and as a couple game. And so, I kind of am hoping that maybe, as I'm recording this with you, I'm thinking more and more my local game store has a copy of Rivals of Catan sitting on the shelf, and I know Thor has them in stock as well last time I checked. So I'm thinking I'm probably going to take the plunge and pick it up and see if maybe some of these issues had been resolved. One little thing that I will throw out there to people who might have the game or have some fond memories of it is I remember reading somewhere on the Geek, somebody kind of did a quick fix. And the quick fix that they found for the Catan card game was simply using 2 production dice. And that probably cut the time of the game in half. And it also, because only one of the dies has the windmill and the Black Knight symbols on them, then when you have the second production die, even if somebody has the windmill, they're only getting 1 of the 2 resources that you might have gained. So it still functions as an advantage for the person who has the windmill because they're going to be gathering free resources, but it doesn't absolutely cripple the other player, which is something that I only played it a couple of times that way, but I found I really actually enjoyed it. It sped the game up and seemed to handle some of that for us a little bit. So I'd be curious if other people had tried that as well. The next game on our list is Netrunner. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that one because I've done an entire episode on Netrunner. Now, of course, that was mostly about the reprint. This is actually the original release of Netrunner in 1996. This is a game that I never actually played. I don't. Did you ever play the original Netrunner? Yeah. I never had any experience with that, but I can tell you for a fact that boy, oh boy, I sure do love the reprint. Just an absolutely fantastic game. And if you're interested in that and listening to this podcast, feel free to go back in the archives there and pull down that episode. I did that with Trent Ham, and he did a wonderful job of sort of explaining that game. And he is a person who played all of the iterations of Netrunner, so he was able to kind of speak to that. So I'll let that go. What else do we have? The next is Age of Renaissance. Now, this is a game that I never had a chance to play, but it's considered by many to be kind of one of those Grail games. Did you ever have a chance to play that?
I owned it, and I don't think I ever played it. It's considered by some to be kind of a sequel to Advanced Civilization, and it certainly is chronologically, and some of the mechanisms are the same. But I didn't like the way that movement worked. You don't move from one space to another the way you do in Civilization or in, say, most games. You have this kind of freewheeling movement, and I just didn't. Parts of the game were too abstracted for me. But it's been a long time. It's a game that I would love to see reprinted. And yeah, that's really all I can say about it. If you are a fan of, the classic Civilization game, and you have lots of extra money, I'm sure you could find a version of it. But I just found that, if I had, on the rare occasions where I have enough people together that are able to dedicate time, I think Age of Renaissance plays with up to 5 players.
Right.
If I had that kind of group of players willing to invest that much time, I would just play Civilization.
Right.
So I guess I found that it didn't really have a place. There used to be a convention held in March, I'm not sure if it's still going on, that played that game. It was a convention just for that one game.
Wow.
And I'm not positive if it's still running or if that convention has kind of changed focus over the years. But I did know there was an avid community of people that were really behind it. But I've kind of lost track of that game over the years.
Gotcha. Yeah, I never had the chance to play it, so I'm grateful for the description that you've given of it, and it sounds like one that I would like to try if I ever had the chance. But as you said, if it's kind of like Advanced Civ, and Advanced Civ is, in your opinion, better, I'd probably just want to play Advanced Civ. But if I didn't have that opportunity and had the chance to play Age of Renaissance, I think I certainly would give it a shot because that whole time period intrigues me quite a bit. And I think it would be, interesting to play a game that was set in that period. How well does the game capture the time period, the historical period?
Yeah, that I really couldn't say. I mean, it's just simply been too long. I probably am not a good person to report on that. If I have played it, it was once, and like I said, I didn't really take a shine to it. So. Okay. Probably, I'm sure there's some reviews on the Geek that could do a better job describing that than me.
Okay. Next up on the list, there's really only 2 other games here that I am kind of even vaguely familiar with, and neither of them are games that I've played. The first one is Serenissima, which is a sort of shipping in the Mediterranean game, probably one of Tom Vassel's favorites.
Yeah, I was going to say, Tom would love this game.
But I never had a chance to play it, though I do know that they just came out with a reprint of it, and that's been available. I just haven't had the chance to play it yet. Did you ever play Serenissima?
I did. My first BGG review was of this game. I think it might still be on there.
Really?
If you look, yes, on BGG. I like this game a lot. It's exactly like what you described. It supports up to 4 players, and the components are just amazing. You get these little ships, and you load these little plastic. My version was plastic. These little plastic squares on, and you sail your ships around. And the interesting part of the game is there's a military component. There's an economic component, and I really liked it. It was a uh, a big part of the game is not just to make lots of money. You're really trying to gather these resources from throughout the Mediterranean into your home city, and so you're almost more like pirating as opposed to being merchants. Or there's a balance between those two things. I like it a lot, and it was one of the first Euros that, with a huge box and with all sorts of cool components that I played ever since, once I left behind the Milton Bradley Game Master, boxes. This was kind of the next version of that for me. Lots of plastic pieces, and it was a lot. I remember it being a lot of fun. It does have. It is possible for a player to be eliminated.
Right.
If you can't produce new galleys. You start off with 2. If your 2 galleys get destroyed by your opponents and you don't have, I think it's iron and wood to produce another galley, you could be eliminated from the game. So, full disclosure there. But it really is just I remember it being a lot of fun, a lot of like backstabbing, and just a really good game.
Well, thanks for sharing that, because it's one that I've been intrigued. I didn't realize you were such a fan. I may have to try and pick up a copy and see if it's as good as you remember it being. That's definitely one that I would be willing to give a try. Now that the reprint is out, it's a lot more, I think, it's a lot more accessible than it used to be. It used to be very hard to try and get a hold of it. And yes, your review is still there. As you were talking, I went and looked,
good.
And your review is still there. So
there
people can go and check it out. Although you abbreviated it SIR, S-E-R. And I say, yeah, it's a little bit of sloppy review in there. I got to tell you, you can't just call it sir. I don't know what that's all about.
Too many. That's too many syllables.
I got period.
I got stuff to do. I can't be all typing out.
Well, that's where you do a find and replace. Yeah, come on.
Serenissima, by the way, in case people are too lazy to look it up, Serenissima means a queen of the seas, and it was, I guess, a nickname for the city of Venice. So that's where the game gets its title.
Very nice. See, now you just instantly restored your geek cred right there by pulling out that fantastic little factoid. All right, moving on. The last one on the list that I'm familiar with would be Show Manager. I actually have played the re-themed version of Show Manager, which was, Atlantic Star. I just got that in a trade and played it, and it was an interesting game. It was very different from what I was expecting, and I can see how, in Atlantic Star, you're basically trying to put together, how should I say it, like cruises, sea routes, either in the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian. I mean, there's all these different sort of oceans that you can try to set up a route to go through. And so I can see how that could have been done with in Show Manager, where you're like bidding on actors and trying to form a cast and put on a show, is my understanding. But I never actually had the chance to play Show Manager, just the re-themed one, Atlantic Star. And then in Atlantic Star, you basically calculate sort of this value for the journey that you have kind of booked. And, if it's the highest value journey in the Pacific that's booked during the game, you're going to get more victory points than another. And so I imagine with Show Manager, it probably works very similarly. The best actors, the best production is going to get you the most victory points, and then downwards from there. But it was a little bit different of a game than what I originally thought it was going to be. Did you ever play Show Manager? Because
no, I haven't played either one.
You haven't played either one. All right. Well, one of these days, maybe when we get together, I'll try to pull out Atlantic Star. I'd be curious, what your opinions of it would be. I did play it once as a 2-player game, and it was, I don't think it's really designed to be a 2-player game. It wasn't very good. But I think if you had a lot of people together, it probably would be much more interesting. So, I'll kind of pull it out, and we'll see if, it's something that you enjoy, because I've heard that Show Manager is, some people prefer it. They think it's just a better game. The theme makes more sense than it does in Atlantic Star. I just took a quick stab at it when someone offered it in trade, because it's, been a game that I've been kind of looking at for a while. So, that's definitely one that I think we'll try with a larger group and see, what that's like. But well, I want to thank you for taking a little trip with me down 1996. Not a lot of games that I have personal experience with, but I think we've managed to hit some of the highlights from that year. Other games like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game and the Settlers of Catan 5 and 6 player expansion. I mean, we could have talked about those, but I generally try to steer away from expansions in these things. And Yu-Gi-Oh! I just have absolutely no experience with. And I'm willing to bet you probably don't have much experience with that either. I know you were a Magic player, so I don't imagine you gravitating towards Yu-Gi-Oh! Thank you for taking the time there to go through the year of 1996. So while we're talking about things that are old, whether it's me and my memory or games from that long ago, I think it would be a good way for us to kind of segue into stepping back in time and running a sort of a medieval kind of farm. And that would be the game of Agricola. Now, I got to tell you, when I first heard about Agricola years and years ago, I was kind of like really surprised. I heard all this great buzz and people were just going nuts about it on the internet. And, this was 2007, so this was a while ago. And I remember just kind of being like scratching my head thinking, okay, so it's a game about running a farm and you have like pigs and sheep and you build fences and plow fields and plant some wheat. I remember thinking to myself, I don't know, man. I don't know what this is all about, but there was so much buzz about it that when I saw it come up for pre-order, I was like, all right, I'm going to buy it. And so I kind of bought it on a whim, not really being sure about the theme, and was really fortunate that I did so because Agricola is one of those in the sort of long line of games that I can think of where the print run did not even come close to meeting the demand. And so I remember I was one of the fortunate ones to have an early copy of that. And, when I got it, I remember being immediately impressed by the components, just the tons of wooden bits in there, the nice thick player boards. I'm looking at you, Oren Labor, with your little stupid warpy boards. These were nice thick cardboard. It was just and then the cards, oh my God, the cards, there were like 50 million cards in that box, and they were all these different decks of cards, and just this, I remember looking through them, flipping through and seeing all of these different items and occupations and thinking, wow, this is kind of crazy. So my first impressions of the game were very, very favorable upon looking at it and my first playthrough. What was your kind of history with Agricola? What were your first impressions? Where did you first hear about it? What drew your attention to this game about farming?
Yeah. Well, like you, I noticed a lot of attention on BGG, and I think, I got a copy fairly early. I don't remember exactly when. And I was impressed by the components, but more impressed by the gameplay itself. I mean, the weird thing about Agricola is that it is not, it's not a game that will entice new players, right? It's tough to get someone that's not a gamer to sit around and play a game about 15th century German farming. It doesn't really speak. It's a very thematic game, but it's not a theme that might immediately grab people. But I remember it was after I had played it a few times. I ran into a friend of mine, and he had actually played it when it was only available in German, and he had been. He had this sort of crib sheet of the different rules translations, and I remember thinking, and he and his friends will still refer to the cards, even though they're out in English and so forth, by their German names. So like the such and such plow goes by this long like 15-syllable German name. So I do know that people had gone to extraordinary lengths in order to play this game, and it's I don't think of that as something that we do all the time. So there must have been something between the buzz and the early adopters that made this a kind of exciting thing before before anyone ever played it. And then, of course, when I did play it, I kind of understood why. It is kind of, you think to yourself, well, what would you do if you were out on a farm? You would, build fences, and you would, raise animals, and you would plant crops. And it does have a very thematic feel to it. The other thing I'll say about Agricola is, I think it was about a year and a half ago, I was at a game store to play Magic, and we didn't have enough people, so we just sat around, and for some reason someone had brought Agricola, and we played it, and I was like, wow, this is a really good game. I had played it, years ago, and then kind of forgot about it. New stuff had come along, but I was reminded of, like, wow, that's really fun. And I turned to the guy that brought the game, and I was like, what made you decide to bring this? And he said, well, my friends and I play this every single week. And I was like, oh, you guys get together and play board games every week? And he said, no, we play Agricola every single week. And I said, how long have you been doing this? A couple months now? He's like, no, for like 3 years. We've been. And I think to myself, that's 150-something games of Agricola.
Right.
And I can't think of many games, apart from classic games like chess or something, bridge, that would have a gaming group get together and play that game and only that game every single week. And I think it speaks to Agricola's replayability and, like you pointed out, Jeff, even the original game had several decks of cards. And, I mean, that's a credit to Zev and, the fact that, that could easily have been you create a base game and then immediately have 2 or 3 expansions. No, the original game box had enough cards to keep you going for quite a while. And then, of course, since then, there's been new iterations of the game. But I give him a lot of credit for, right out of the gate, issuing several different decks and having that replayability that would allow a gaming group to play that game for years. I mean, that's and so it speaks to the game's mechanics and also to its replayability.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you do have to give some credit to Z-Man for that. I think there's like 3 decks of cards in there. You have the basic deck, the interactive deck, and the complex deck. And, those 3 decks of cards are not inconsequential in number. I would have to say each deck of cards has got to be at least 60, somewhere between 60 and 100 cards per deck. It's an insane amount of cards. And, those cards completely, change up the game. And I really enjoyed the way the cards were themed in that, you had the sort of basic cards that, were pretty straightforward, pretty easy to use, would give you some sort of a benefit when you played them. Okay, well, guess what? You have a private forest. You're going to be collecting wood, every round or, something of that nature. However, when you brought in the interactive deck or the complex deck, it just really sort of ramped up the complexity in the interactions between the cards and the possible card combinations that you could make. So right out the gate, you really have a game system that is almost kind of, I don't want to say it's infinite in its variability, but you'd have to play probably at least as long as that game group you were talking to has played to even come close to running through all of the different combinations of cards, let alone the fact that every game of Agricola, there are a multitude of different methods out there for how to get your cards for the game. So, I know we're not doing a very good job of explaining exactly, the sort of basics of this game. And I think it's probably because I'm assuming everybody knows it. But for those who don't, it's a game for 1 to 5 players. The designer is Uwe Rosenberg. Was put out by Z-Man Games here in the United States. And the theme, of course, we've already covered. But as you mentioned, it is kind of at heart sort of a worker placement resource collection sort of a game. You start off the game with 2 family members. Basically, you are imagining a husband and a wife. And they are going to go out and they're going to gather resources in order to improve their farm. So that could be something like going and gathering wood, which can be used to build fences or build additional rooms in your home. It could be clay. It could be reeds for the roof of your home. I mean, how many games have reeds in them? and so you kind of start off the game by sort of gathering some basic resources and trying to expand your home, expand your holdings, build some fences so that you can start raising some animals and also maybe planting some crops. And there's some very interesting systems by which you do this. When you place one of your pieces on a field, all of the resources that are in that area, you're going to collect. If nobody takes any of the resources, they continue to stack. They continue to grow so that these spaces become more and more attractive as time goes by to the players. So that's a really interesting kind of mechanism that I remember kind of seeing in that game and thinking, that's really nifty. It's kind of enticing people to maybe take something that they might not have an immediate need for or plan for, but it's just too juicy to pass up. The game also has an interesting system whereby these sort of selection fields, I'm calling them, where you're either selecting resources that you're gathering or you're selecting an action that you're taking. They reveal themselves slowly over time during the course of the game. There's some basic actions that are available from the get-go. And then from there, every round, you're going to flip up a card that goes on this sort of central board that's going to either be new resources like stone, perhaps, that could be gathered, or animals that you can, acquire so that you can start to breed them and raise them, or other actions in the game. And so there's all of these different things, but they never come out in exactly the same way. So there's some variability right there built into the game as well. And then when you add the cards on top of that, you get this really unique system of worker placement, resource gathering. I would argue sort of an engine building game as you expand your family, get more workers. All of these things kind of work together. You have played this game more than I have, though. So could you speak to some of the methods and some of the ways in which the original card distribution for the players goes? Because I know that there's drafting versions, there's blind draw. What can you tell me about those?
Well, a couple things. One is I only learned about these other ways in playing the iPad app, and maybe we can talk about that in a little bit. The only way I've ever played it, and I'm not sure why this is, but the only way I've ever played it is you just get your starting hand of cards, and the cards you are dealt are the ones you have, and there are the other methods that you mentioned. One is a drafting mechanism. Think something like Notre Dame or Magic the Gathering sealed draft.
Right.
You get a certain number of cards. I think it's maybe you get 7, and then you pick one, and eventually you pass to the left and so forth. There's different rules for it, but you basically build your hand. The other one that I've seen on the app is that you're dealt 10 cards and you simply discard 3. So you can decide how you want to proceed, and you can kind of build in a strategy before the game officially begins. I did want to say one thing. You had given me really good advice when we first played Agricola, and it speaks to the one of the features of the game that you just mentioned, which is that different resources are available at a later stage of the game. So in round 1, there won't be any stone available. That is, unless you're playing with a large number of players. So I think with 4 players or more, maybe there's a stone that you can get early. But in the game that we were playing, it wasn't available. Same thing with pigs and cows and so forth. So you had given me a really good idea, which was, take the cards that you're dealt with and just set aside, kind of forget about for now, for round 1, forget about the ones that have to do with cows and pigs and stuff like that. And I found for my first game that was really good advice, because one feature of that kind of added complexity, or you're adding complexity into the game with more resources and more things that you can do. One of the things that it can lead to is a kind of feeling of being overwhelmed for a new player.
Right.
I've got so many things that I can do. Well, you do, but realize that, in round one, you won't be able to build a room in your house, which means you won't be able to use the family growth feature. And that feature isn't even coming online for another few rounds. So for now, just worry about doing this small number of things. And okay, now that you're familiar with those things, we're going to add in these other features, but we're going to do it gradually so that, a new player, I think Agricola is a complex game, but it's one that someone that is familiar with board games can grasp. It has this balance between being complex without necessarily being overwhelming for the reasons that you just mentioned. And I think that's one of the things that's made the game really successful. That's not the case with something like Puerto Rico, for instance, which I really like. In Puerto Rico, you have to explain to a new player what all of the special buildings do, because theoretically, they could all be available very early in the game. If someone picks the builder action, well, now you have to explain what all of these things do. It's not really like that with Agricola. You can kind of, move people along a little bit more slowly. And so that's actually one of the reasons I think the game has been successful. So even though there's different ways of drafting those initial cards, I actually think that that strategy that you'd show me, just kind of put these ones out of your mind for a while and only focus on the ones that you can immediately use, those occupations and different special cards. Focus on those ones and kind of put the other ones out of your mind, at least for a new player. That was really good advice.
Well, I'm glad that you thought that was good advice. I did it just to kind of maintain my own sanity because of all of the reasons you were talking about. It can be very overwhelming to have all of those different options available to you when you're trying to, I think most people's natural reaction is to want to do everything. And in particular with games like this where you have these cards that do these really neat things. And, that's something that when I've taught the game, I've advised people to do too, which is, don't think that you're going to have to or even want to use all of these cards this game. The sheer number of occupations that you'd have to drill through, to get to all of the occupation cards in your hand, probably in terms of the action cost, not even something you would even really want to do. Unless you have some sort of a bonus card that, is going to give you buku points for having X number of occupations. Because one of the things, about the game is it's always very tense when you're looking at your selections because, you really want to put this occupation card out or you really want to make this minor improvement that you have. But the problem is there's 6 wood sitting there. And my gosh, you've had a stupid sheep in your house now for a while. And if you don't get that sheep a special friend sometime soon, you're not going to ever get any sheep going. And you're looking at your food supply and you're like, this isn't very good. And it's like, all right, if I let that wood go, guess what? No stables, no fences, no sheep. And I might be looking at some starvation here in the winter. If I don't get my act together. So, it's often impossible. As a matter of fact, I've never played a game of Agricola where I've built every card out of my hand. Now, I am not, any kind of an Agricola expert, but I would say that it's just, you can't do it. I mean, the rest of your game would fall apart. So, you have to pick and choose, and you have to sort of build your strategy each game around maybe 2 or 3 of those cards that you have. And the rest of them, if you can get them built, God bless you. They'll do something fun for you. But they're not really essential. And so, you always have to be very aware of the board state and what everybody else is doing, what everybody else is looking for, because if you delay by taking a different action, you could very easily lose out. I think one of the clearest spaces on the board that demonstrates what I'm talking about is the So Baked Bread. Man, that stinking space. So Baked Bread is a space on the board where you can send one of your family members and it will allow you to, plant in fields that you have plowed, and it will allow you to also turn extra grain that you might have, which is difficult to get in the first place, and bake bread. so that you can have some bread for food for later in the game. And we're going to talk a lot about the food in a few minutes. But for right now, just that idea of the competition, you have one space where you can get cattle. You have one space where you can sow and bake bread. Now, there's another space where you can sow a field, but of course, everybody wants the sow, bake bread.
Not everyone.
Not
everyone. I was going to say, we should play again. It's been a while because I never use that space.
You never use that.
I hate that space. Maybe it's because it's always so fought over.
That space is dead to you.
I never, I don't want to build an oven. We're getting maybe ahead of ourselves. There's different cards that are, we talked about the cards that are in your hands that only you can use, but there's other, what are called major improvements, which are these commonly available cards. Well, and they include mainly things to produce food. So there's ovens, there's fireplaces and cooking hearths, and then there's a few special cards like a well that gives you food kind of gradually. And I always go, I'm revealing my secrets here, my Agricola secrets. I always go for a cooking hearth because the way that works is that you can kind of create an engine there where you can turn excess animals into food. And what often happens is that a sheep card comes up early in the game, let's say, the first or second round, before people have really the pasture space, the fencing and so forth to contain the sheep. So, as Jeff said, that will just continue to accumulate sheep upon sheep upon sheep, and eventually, someone will take it. But if you get the cooking hearth, you can just turn them into delicious sheep stew, and that's something. If you can get that going early, buy the cooking hearth, and then take the sheep fest over there. It's a good way to stockpile some food early. But I never go with sow bake bread because I like being able to get food from animals or from vegetables or from you can even, there's a kind of, feature where you can bake bread using a cooking hearth. It's not very effective, but the cooking hearth gives you an opportunity to get food from all of the game's resources, and that's why I usually go for it. I don't want to mess around with the ovens. They're difficult and expensive, and you have to get the bread, and I don't
have to knead it. It's one of the things that people don't know.
It's a proofing process. You got to collect the wild yeast.
That's right.
Right.
And don't even get me started on the sourdough starter.
Right. I think my players have always been gluten free. I've got gluten free people.
They're all just straight carnivores. All right. So Justin just hoards, maybe some grain in a silo that he just keeps for an emergency later. And since we're talking about food, let's talk about food because, that's one of the things about the game that I actually like the least.
Really?
Yeah. It's a drag.
What don't you like about
it? It's a drag. So let me explain.
It's the best part of the
No,
game.
It's not. It's a drag. So
no, you have to come up with an economic
You're
engine.
Wrong.
You might have all of these grandiose ideas, but if your people are starving,
can eat money in La Havre. That's why it's better. Anyway, all right. Let me talk about food, and I'm going to tell you why I don't like the food.
Why.
All right, I'm going to tell you all about it. Here we go. So in Agricola, you have many different sort of rounds. And I think in the first sort of set of rounds, you're going to have like 5 turns, and then you're going to have what's called a harvest. And during the harvest phase, a couple of things are going to happen. If you have planted any grain, you're going to harvest. When you plant grain in a plowed field, you basically get to take these 3 yellow-colored markers, discs, and put them on the field. And that's kind of showing you that it has been sowed and you have grain growing. When you harvest, you pull the top one off the stack. So basically, when you plant a field with grain, you're going to be getting grain for 3 different harvest phases, all right, automatically. There are also vegetables that you can plant. And when you plant vegetables, you only put 2 out. But
Jeff, I don't mean to correct here, but when you plant one of your, just want to clarify here, when you put one of your own from your supply, one of your grain, you put 2 from the bank on top of it. So essentially triple your investment over the course of 3 harvests. With vegetables, it's 1 from the bank for 1 of yours, so you double your investment over 2 harvests.
Absolutely. No, thanks for clarifying that. I didn't explain that well enough, but yeah, you're absolutely right. So basically what you're getting is a steady sort of a flow. It's very difficult to get the grain. You know, first you have to plow the field, then you have to get the grain, then you have to sow it. So it's like a 3-step process, which is rather arduous, which is why your people are gluten-free. However,
right, cooking hearth, people. Right. I'm telling you here, Longview listeners, go with the cooking hearth.
But the bottom line is that you're going to have to feed your people. You're going to have to feed your family, and you need two foods. You need two. You need 2 pieces of food per family member at the end of a harvest round. And so what happens is you have about, I think, 5 turns, if my memory serves. 5 rounds before the first harvest and the first feeding, and usually you only have 2, maybe 3 people in your family if you're really lucky, okay? But then it ramps up. Then you only have 4 rounds. Then you only have 3 rounds. Then you only have 2 rounds. And so the kind of relentless pressure to feed your people builds throughout the course of the game. And it's one of the things about the game that I feel is extremely unthematic and very artificial, because why is 1 year so much longer than the last year? It doesn't make any sense. Is the Ice Age coming? Is this like the little Ice Age in England and Northern Europe?
I've always just thought that your people are lazier, so it's your people just get
they're
lazy.
Farmers. No, they're not lazy.
Maybe they've got TV, maybe they've moved into the modern era, and American Idol is on. Right. And they just, they have fewer actions because they're just, if they didn't do that, the game would just, the game would be too easy. I actually think that the, relentless pressure for food is the best part of the game.
I disagree.
It is.
I disagree.
It really is the best part, because you always have to consider it, and you may have all these grandiose plans, but, the expectations and the demands, it's also a check on family size. And I hope this doesn't take us too far afield here, Jeff, but one criticism that I've heard, I think it might have even been from another podcast of Agricola, was that there's kind of a, for all of its, we talked before about its replayability and all of its variations, the single strategy really is, that this person has said, I forget who it was, but someone else has said that the strategy is, have as many people as you can in a stone house. 5 family members in a stone house will win you the game no matter what. Regardless of what cards there are or special bonuses, if you can pull that off, you're probably going to win. And I wanted to get your take on that, because family size, not only does it give you more actions, it gives you tons of points. You actually get points for your family members.
Yeah.
But it speaks to your point about the food supply, because you're a lot of times needing to spend actions in order to keep your family members from begging or essentially from losing you points. So I actually think it's a good that the harvest and feeding mechanism is an important check on that, because otherwise everyone would it would only be about growing your family, whereas now, the harvest mechanism is an important kind of check on that, because, I don't want to grow my family too fast or have too many people, because that's just more mouths I got to feed. And that's one of the balances of the game that I really like.
All right. Well, I'm going to tell you a couple ways in which you're wrong.
Nice.
No, I totally get what you're saying, which is that it is a check against family growth. I think you're absolutely right. I still stand by what I said, though. I feel it's artificial. I think there are other things that could have been done in the game. I think you could have widened the sandbox a little bit and had it, possible that, maybe your harvest or your feeding is, every 4 rounds consistently, something consistent. I kind of always objected to that sort of acceleration of it. The game itself, I feel that one of the criticisms that I've always leveled at it is that just when I feel like things are finally starting to look the way I would like them to look, things are starting to go the way I would like them to go, the game's over. And that's a little bit of a source of frustration for me. And I've talked about it before, so I'm not going to belabor the point. Anybody who's listened, knows that one of the things that I love about Le Havre is the fact that, you generally have about 3 or 4 rounds at the end of the game where you can just watch your engine run. And that gives me as a gamer a lot of satisfaction. Whereas in Agricola, it's a nail biter. It's very tense, and I don't get as much enjoyment. It's much more stressful to me than I think it needs to be. Now,
it sounds like you're saying that Agricola is really exciting and that Le Havre is really scripted. So is
do
I have you right on that?
Le Havre is not scripted at all. It's just that it's nice that you get
end,
to. No,
whereas Agricola is really exciting
don't even
and
try
tense
to put words
at
in my
the
mouth
end.
there, Nordstrom. No, you're totally wrong. It's not scripted at all. But
Agricola is the game where I build a building, and the second I finish it, you waltz in and say, "Oh, here's a fish. Thanks for building this new building." I'm like, that's great.
Well,
thanks a lot.
You
enjoy that
I
fish,
don't know
Nordstrom.
what to tell you about that. I think you need to play it a little bit more before.
No, I've played it plenty of times. That game is just fundamentally messed up.
It's
Agricola,
fantastic. All right,
it's the way to go.
Let's
all
go
the
back.
Way.
Let's go back now. Let's stay focused now. And so I won't get off on my little rants, and you won't get off on yours about building a building and giving you a piece of food for it. It's here, boy. Here's a sausage.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's like.
Anyway,
it's like, thank you for working so hard to build the Smitty. I'm just going to waltz in and use it, and you can't use it until I'm done with it. You enjoy that fish.
All right. Now you're trying to kill the host. Sorry about that. I got a kind of I've been struggling with a cold now for about 2 weeks, and now you got me coughing, and that's not a good thing. So, anyway. Wow.
We should just agree. To save your voice, we should just agree that I'm right.
All right. Wow. All right. Here we go. Reset.
Okay.
I don't like the feeding. I don't like it.
Tell.
Listen. There's a few things about Agricola that bother me. As much as I enjoy the game, the feeding is the one. I feel that is. I don't like the system as a whole. I feel that it's too distracting. I've had games of Agricola, especially at a higher player count, which I don't like. I don't like playing it with 5. I kind of feel like, I spend 3/4 of my game trying to think about how to feed my people. And that to me is just not fun. So that's, but I've already kind of talked about that, and I understand your points. And I know from a game mechanics and strategy standpoint and design standpoint, I'm sure you're right. From a play standpoint, from a fun standpoint, it's not fun to me when I've had those games where it's like, oh, good, I get to go fishing, which nobody ever wants to do.
I love fishing.
Because
fishing, again, this is like, I'm going to teach you the ways. You're spending too much time with the oven. Fishing's the best because, all right, well, if you get the right stuff, if you get the
fishing
canoe
rod
and the raft and the fishing pole, then that one action gets you a truckload of food, and because you have those things, everyone else thinks, well, fishing is worthless. I don't want to do that. I'm become the fisherman with the cooking hearth, and I think one of the things that I like about the game is that, I see what you mean about the lack of theme. With the increase in harvest and so forth, but I want to make sure we get back to the ideal number of players, which I think is probably 4.
No, yeah, we'll definitely get back to that.
Yeah, but I like the fact that a worthless action like fishing could become really valuable in the right situation.
Oh no, absolutely, and you're totally right. And I've had games where I've had the fishing rod. And it is, very valuable. Most of the time, though, I would, consider that not to necessarily be an optimal move. It's usually something that somebody, it's not as bad as the day laborer, don't get me wrong, but it's because as you said, sometimes that fish can kind of accumulate and you can get yourself a nice little haul, nice little catch of fish. But, often I think, when you don't have that many actions in the game to begin with, it's not a creative action. It's not an action that is going to both improve your position and accomplish the goal of feeding your people. Whereas the So Bake Bread is, because here I'm doing two different things. It's a twofer. And I think that's probably why it's so hotly contested. And I think it's also why animals are so hotly contested, because of exactly the reason you brought, which is that, it's not only a valuable source of points at the end of the game, which is something else I want to talk about, but it is also a wonderful way to augment your food supply in case you're running short of food. So all of those things I agree with. Now, I want to circle back real quick just to talk about the build a stone house with 5 people and you win the game. Well, possibly. You do get, I think, 3 points per family member. So if you have 5 family members right there, that's 15 points. You get, I forget how many points for each stone room, but
I think it's 3 points per room or something. Yeah. Maybe 2 points. No, it's 2 points per room, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty significant. I think it's 3 and 2. I don't think you get anything for wood though, so it might be just 1 for clay and 2 for stone, But the bottom line is I totally disagree with that statement. And here's why. In order to get that much family growth, in order to get that much stone, that much reed, again, unless you have a card, there is a card that will allow you to go straight from a wood structure to a stone structure.
Conservator or something. I think that's what it is, conservator,
right. Yeah. The conservator, thank you, yes. If you don't have that, though, the amount of actions you are going to have to select in order to do that, to get those points, is probably, I would guess, about at least a third of the actions that you're going to take in the entire game, if not more, just to accomplish that goal. And that kind of brings me around to the scoring system, which is one of the things I like about Agricola, but also one of my pet peeves yet again, which is the fact that, okay, you spend all that time making that stone house and having all those people, well, guess what? If you don't have any sheep, if you don't have enough pigs, if you don't have any cows, you're going to actually lose points. You don't have a vegetable, guess what? You just lost a point for that too. And so the game, one of the other criticisms that has been leveled at it is that it forces everyone to sort of go down the same path, in that at the end of the game, you need to have a farm that A, has as many spaces, if not all, on that board covered. B, has sheep and pigs and cows. Hopefully a lot of 1 or 2 of those, but you got to have all 3 or you're going to lose points. You must have some grain. You must have some vegetables. And so at the end, it's kind of like you're all sort of competing to do exactly the same thing, which is why I think whoever made the claim, and I'm not trying to start a flame war here, maybe if I'm lucky enough that I have an audience large enough that person hears this and they can explain it to me, fine. I'm not like calling them a liar. I'm just saying that my initial reaction to that statement is no way, because you wouldn't have time to do all the other things you need to do in order to not be losing points while your opponents are gaining points for doing what the game is designed to push you to do.
Sure.
And, that's the other thing that, I want to get your reaction to it. I know I cut you off, but I want to get your reaction to it, which is, that whole system of you must have something of everything. Like, you cannot specialize in the game. And sometimes I wish you could. I mean, that's one of the things I like about Le Havre, because, again with the Le Havre, because, inexperienced Le Havre players, in my opinion, will tell you, oh, well, it's all about steel and coke, and that's all it's all about. And that's how you win the game. Well, no, there's actually a lot of different ways to win that game once you've played it, just like there is with Agricola. But the thing about Agricola is you are kind of going to be penalized if you try to specialize in any way, whereas you're not penalized if you specialize in Le Havre. So what are your thoughts about the scoring system as a whole and my analysis of the stone house 5 people thing?
Well, I think the person that made that argument, and I wish I remember who it was, would say, remember, of course, that although it takes a lot of resources to build a big stone house with 5 people in it, those 5 people give you many more actions. So I don't know about the mathematics of the whole thing. And there are parts, I think, even though I like Agricola a lot, the game does feel kind of mathy after a while. I think that every time I've won the game, I've had a stone house with 5 people. So it might just be that's true for inexperienced people, and I would consider myself an inexperienced, Agricola player. I've played it, face to face with human players, maybe only 10 times, and I still think, I'm still figuring the game out. I've played it a lot on the iPad, but there it's not exactly the same thing because the computer tends to kind of funnel, at least in my experience, funnel me into a particular strategy. But I feel as if I don't know. I mean, but it's a chicken and an egg thing. Is it the case that I'm doing really well and I've created a good economic engine, probably with my cooking hearth, and I've been able to then have the flexibility to have a stone house with 5 people because I'm already doing well? Or is it the case that because I've got 5 people, I've got a lot more actions, and so that makes me perform the game well? I don't know. But what I will say is, when I win Agricola, I've got a stone house with 5 people. So, but I don't know which comes first. Does that make sense? The way I'm describing it seems kind of strange.
It makes sense, but I would have to seriously question the skill level of the other players if they're allowing you to take family growth that often.
Sure.
And they're not. I mean, that just makes no sense at all to me because
you're exactly right. Yeah.
You'd have to select it at least 3 times. And, eventually, at least one of those times, I would guess, would have to be the family growth even without room in your house action, which comes up very late in the game. So I don't know how much value you're getting for that 5th worker. And I don't know that – I don't know too many human opponents that are going to let you get away with that. So, that's something that, I wonder because – honestly, I've had quite a few games recently on the iPad app where I have the stone house and I have about 4 people, and I do very well. But the AI inexplicably gets into some of these loops, and I don't know whether the AI is as good in the Agricola app as, obviously an experienced human opponent's going to be. If I see you doing that, there's no way I'm letting you do it. And if you try to force it by taking star player, well, then the next round, I'm going to make sure that I take star player because you're not going to want to continually waste an action on making sure that you get star player so that you can lock down family growth. I mean, there you're taking 2 of these vaunted 4 or 5 actions in order just to ensure the growth. And I just don't know that that's going to add up, but again, I could be wrong.
No, the point that you just made is one that I was going to say, which is, it could be the case that in the early rounds, I've got a ton of food, so I don't have to spend actions getting food, and I've stockpiled enough resources, and I'm already doing well, so I feel like it is almost like a double, investment, because you have to take star player and then you take family growth, and you need to have the rooms in your house in the early and mid game. So it is, I think, maybe it's almost like accumulation of riches. The rich get richer. That's a phrase you had used earlier, and maybe that's what's in play here. All I know is that when I end up doing well in the game, I tend to be in that situation, but I don't know if I'm in that situation because of other factors. If that makes any sense.
No, that makes sense. Certainly it does. What would you say, though, to the overall scoring system that I had brought up? Is that something that you're a fan of or not?
I don't know. I mean, basically what happens is the game penalizes you for excluding things. And so just like you said, the difference between having 0 vegetables and 1 vegetable isn't 1 point. It's really 2 points. If you've got 1 vegetable, it's 1 point. If you've got 0 vegetables, it's minus 1 point. So generally what I end up doing is like ignoring certain things, and then in the end I have to spend a resource to like grab a vegetable or grab a grain or something. So I feel as if I actually find myself, I actually do specialize, but I have to remember in the back of my mind, I have to remember, oh, geez, remember, you've got to get one of these things before the game is over. I ignore certain resources for 80, 90% of the game, and I just grab one at the very end. So that doesn't really make it seem very thematic. What does it matter if I'm eating tons of mutton, if I have a pig or not? Who cares? So maybe the game is that's where I meant about the mathiness of it. Also, I always have to remember that I need to have empty spaces in your farmyard, your player mat, count against you. So sometimes I'll put up kind of worthless fences that I don't even need,
right, or a stable,
just so I don't lose points. So I will say that we started off by saying that this game has kind of this theme that is an important part of the game, but there's times that it doesn't really feel very thematic, and I accept that. I still like the game a lot. I was actually going to ask, this is probably my top 5 games that I've ever played, but I'm guessing it's probably not in yours. Is that true, Jeff?
Well, it's definitely not in my top 5. I would say it's probably in my top 20. I don't even know that it's in my top 10. But that also could be that I just, I don't have as much opportunity to play it. My wife is not fond of it for the feeding. She really dislikes the feeding almost as much as you dislike, the building rental in Le Havre.
No one dislikes anything as much as I dislike that.
But yeah, so I've actually played it a lot more with the iPad. And while we're talking about the iPad app, I'll just throw a quick word out there, which is I think it's gorgeous. I think it's beautiful. I love the implementation of it. I question some of the decisions of the early AIs, the easier AIs. I think they're rather stupid.
Yeah, it's not worth playing with them. I have to play with the AI on master level. Plus, it makes me feel smarter.
Yes.
It's not really masterful. It's just decent.
Right.
I really, if you've played the game once face to face with human opponents, just start the game with the AI on master level. Really, it's that blatant.
It's very
and
clearly
I'm almost to the point where I would play. I think is Playdeck that made the iOS version.
I'm not sure, but it might be.
I think it is. It's great, and it's funny because I haven't played Agricola before I purchased that. Since that day at the game store, and it's a game that I used to adore, and I just never really get to the table. But now I play it all the time, albeit against computer opponents, and it's kind of reminded me why I like it so much. Speeds up the scoring. That's another thing we should point out, that the game is kind of, I don't want to say anticlimactic at the end, but the scoring, once you get a hang of it, it goes quicker. But when you're getting used to the game, if you haven't played Agricola face to face, the scoring takes a while to kind of figure out, and there are some pretty good apps for it that will speed it up too. But it's another part of the game that if you're not familiar with it, could take a while.
No, that's definitely true, and there's things that you can easily forget if you're not careful. Although the little score pad that comes with the game is pretty handy. I've found it to be pretty useful. But overall, I think the iPad app is excellent. I love I know people have complained about it, but I actually really like the sort of village view, and once you know what the action selection spaces are based on the little signs that are outside the house, there's usually little animations, and it's really cute. I don't need to have the text there. I've played it enough now, and I think it's just a beautiful implementation. The game also runs extremely smoothly. I've only had a crash on me once in all the times I've played it, and I think that it was very well programmed and clearly a superior product. So hats off to them for doing a fantastic job of porting that to iOS. And I don't think it's available on Android. I think at this point it's just an iOS app, but maybe someone can tell me that I'm wrong. I'm hoping that I am, because the more of these iOS apps that are put out, the more I realize how much fun it is to have them, and the more I realize that they are actually bringing more people to board gaming. I think the initial fears that the electronic versions would hurt board game sales, I think has pretty resoundingly been answered in the negative. I mean, it's actually exactly the opposite. It seems that they are encouraging physical board game sales, which I think is really neat and really good for the hobby. So I'm very happy about that. Well, excuse me. I'm going to try that again. Well, I have kind of gone over all the things that I really love about Agricola, the things that bother me a little bit about it. I think we've covered the bases pretty well. One of the questions that I'd like to ask you, though, Justin, is are there any particular sort of cards that you look for or card combinations that you really enjoy when playing Agricola? Any improvements that you love or that you particularly are looking for? Because I know for a lot of people, the cards are really sort of the heart of the game. I would argue that that's not necessarily the case. I think that the cards are like the seasoning. They're like the spice for the game, if I'm going to use a cooking analogy, since you've got me thinking about mutton.
Cooking horse, yeah, there you go.
I really think the cards are what add that little extra layer, that little flavor. Are there any cards that you particularly enjoy?
Yeah, I'm reminded of the How to Play podcast. Ryan Sturm sometimes gives advice, which is the Swiss Army knife of Eurogaming is to find out what no one else is doing and do that. And so I like to take that philosophy when it comes to the cards that I use. I like to take a space that other people wouldn't even consider when they're looking for what to do on their turn, and I like to make that space valuable for me. So rather than finding a way to compete, although that is another card I could talk about, the best card when I play against the iOS opponent is Head of the Family, which allows you to take certain actions like building rooms and family growth, even if those spaces are already taken. And because those parts of the game tend to have a lot of competition, that's the card I always take first. But if I was playing with human opponents, or if that card wasn't available to me, I would take things like the ones that make fishing, which is normally kind of not very valuable, make that a useful space. So, for instance, I like taking cards that will make a space that gives me food also give me some resource. So, for instance, if you get, I think it's the canoe, well, then fishing gives you not just food but reed. Well, so normally now I don't have to. It's like I save myself an action. I don't have to take a separate action to get food or get reed. Now I can get it in one spot. The same thing with there's a day laborer card, or I don't know. There's a card that allows you to take the day laborer action and get grain or get vegetables. I like to take those cards because now I have these resources, but I also have food. I don't have to decide, do I take food to keep my family alive, or do I take resources? I like to take ones that give me both. And again, fishing and day laborers, it's not like I'm going to face a lot of competition. It's not like, oh, well, I've invested all these resources to get these cards, but now, everyone else in the game wants the same space I do. No, they're taking kind of marginal spaces that don't get a lot of attention and making them more valuable for me. So that tends to be my kind of strategy. It's kind of a non-confrontational strategy. It's like you guys fight over the more hotly contested resources. I'll just be over here with my little fishing pole or my day laborer guy, and that's kind of the approach that I take. I'm not saying it's a good approach, but it's kind of what I've gravitated towards. How about you, Jeff? What do you like to do?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because there's I'm a big fan of those as well. Not so much because of the lack of competition and trying to avoid that, but because I like things that make it more efficient. So I like anything that's going to turn a single action into a double action. In addition, I also like the cards that are usually pretty cheap to put out that will give me resources every round. There are certain cards that will put, like the Private Forest I mentioned, that will put resources, whether it be food or grain or wood or whatever, on the main board. And then as you go from round to round, they're like freebies that you get to collect. And they're often not like earth-shattering amounts. It might only be one, but I can't tell you the number of times that I've wanted to take, add a room to my house, which requires 5 wood, and I only have 4. Well, now suddenly, because of that one little card, I've got the fifth one that I need, and boom, I've got it. Or that one little wood allows me to also build a stable. And so again, it's anything that's going to give me that little bonus are generally the cards that I like, because it just kind of helps me move past this sort of food problem and allow me to sort of focus on some other things. I also like the cards, like the Shepherd's Horn, cards that will allow you to keep more animals either in unfenced stables or, increase the capacity of your farm in some way. I think there's a card there that will allow you to keep certain, I think it's like pigs or whatever, along the border of your board where there's trees. And so there's these different cards that will allow you to do things like that, which I really kind of enjoy. So those are kind of the ones that I gravitate towards. I'd be curious what any listeners would like to sort of chime in with as far as combinations of cards or individual cards that they really, seem to gravitate towards or like to use as often as possible. So, perhaps we can encourage some people to post their thoughts in the thread for the episode. That would be fantastic. So, Justin, I want to thank you for taking the time tonight to go over Agricola with me. I think it's a important game. I think it's a game that I've wanted to talk about for a while. And I'm glad that I was able to talk, with you about it because, it's a game that you enjoy so much. It's in your top 5 there. So thank you for taking the time. Once again, want to thank everybody out there for listening. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the Dice Tower Network. The Longview is happy to be part of that family of podcasts, and it's a fantastic resource for gamers to go and find out all kinds of fantastic news and reviews and information for this board gaming hobby we all love. And of course, I want to say a special thank you to my sponsor, GameSurplus.com. Please consider ordering from GameSurplus.com if you're going to pick up a copy of Agricola, or perhaps the newest, latest, greatest game from Uwe Rosenberg, which I believe is due out later this month, or hopefully maybe in January, of Caverna, which many people have, horror of horrors, said replaces Agricola. Is that true or not? I don't know. We'll have to find out. And so for myself and for Justin Nordstrom, I want to say thanks to everybody out there for listening, and have a great night.